Hello and welcome. I am Chakshu Roy and you are watching Laws in the Making on Rajya Sabha TV. Today on the show, we are discussing the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. To discuss the bill, I have on the show with me Subimal Bhattacharjee, Cyber Policy Expert, Dr. Karnika, Seth, Cyber Policy Expert, and Manish, Kanadje, Analyst, PRS Legislative Research. The Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 was introduced in the winter session of Parliament and has been referred to a joint parliamentary committee. The bill places certain obligations on entities processing personal data and gives rights to individuals whose personal data is processed. It also establishes a data protection authority for this purpose.
Following the Supreme Court judgment in 2017, which declared privacy as a fundamental right, the government set out to introduce a data protection law. In India, the usage of personal data or information of citizens is currently regulated by IT Rules 2011 under the IT Act 2000. The Act applies only to companies but not the government. The 2019 Data Protection Bill applies to all entities processing personal data, both government as well as companies incorporated in India. It also extends to foreign companies which deals with personal data of individuals in India. To prevent data misuse and to ensure overall compliance with the bill establishes a data protection authority.
मैम, जैसा कि नेशनल सिक्योरिटी को लेके बात की जाती है, हमारे जो रविशंकर जी हैं उन्होंने एक अमेंडमेंट पास किया है कि फेसबुक हो गया, व्हाट्सएप हो गया, जब कोई भी सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म हो गया, वो सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म को एक बिल जारी किया गया है कि जितना हमारा गोपनीय डाटा होता है, जितना हमारा सुरक्षित डाटा होता है, अपना उस डाटा की अमेंडमेंट करके जो भी नोडल ऑफिसर है वो पर्टिकुलर केस के बिटवीन में, केस के दौरान में पर्टिकुलर आईओ को प्रोवाइड कराए और सारा जितनी डाटा की स्टोरेज होगी वो यूएसए में ना जाकर हमारे इंडिया में स्टोरेज हो उसकी.
The bill gives certain rights to individuals to protect their personal data. The bill defines personal data as any piece of information from which inferences can be drawn to identify a person. Individuals can get confirmation from data entities on whether their personal data has been processed, seek correction of inaccurate, incomplete personal data, and have personal data transferred to any other data fiduciary under certain condition. Individuals can also prevent access to their personal data if it's no longer necessary for data entity to hold on to.
See, this bill has various provisions and it is not aimed at completely controlling the data transfer, but this bill does it by categorizing the data into sensitive personal data and critical personal data. And this bill envisages that the critical personal data is kept in this country so that the people whose data it is, they can exercise better control, whether they want to share the data for a long period, short period, whether they want to withdraw their consent. So otherwise the data flow is absolute. For the commercial purposes, the data can be flown across the borders as it is being done today. There is no complete bar on it, but there are certain legible restrictions on that. That is again being done, I believe, to ensure better privacy as the judgment of Honorable Supreme Court given in the Bhattacharjee case, where the privacy has been declared as a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So the control of flow to a certain extent is important. Otherwise, the local law enforcement agencies in India are finding it not possible to enforce the laws of the India and the Constitution of India.
Under the bill, personal data can only be processed for a specific, clear and lawful purpose. Further, the bill allows personal data collection only with the consent of the individual, with some exceptions. They include events such as a medical emergency or legal proceedings, or if required by the state to provide benefits to individuals. Further, the central government could exempt any of its agencies from the provisions of the bill in the interest of national security, public order and sovereignty.
The Data Protection Bill has been in the making for some time. Karnika, let me start the program with you. Can you walk us through what is the context which has led, to the bill being introduced in Parliament?
Yes. This personal data protection is a important subject. Just the main purpose of having this bill is to protect the data of citizens. vis-a-vis government or vis-a-vis any private party or even foreign companies which are operating in India and working with personal data. It all started with the challenge to whether this right to privacy is a fundamental right or not. And it has been said by the 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court that yes, this is a fundamental right of every citizen of India, and one must protect the fundamental right. And then this led to the formation of the or appointment of the Justice Sri Krishna Committee to formulate the bill and the nuances of what exactly will be the modalities of safeguarding privacy of citizens and information of citizens, their personal data, classifying what is sensitive personal data. And this was finally laid out by the Justice Sri Krishna Committee, and now it's being the cabinet nod was given, and now it is being put before the joint parliamentary committee, and hopefully in this new year.
And a report is expected towards the end of the budget session of Parliament.
Budget session of the
So, Bimal, one of the things that people talk about in the current context is that data is the new oil. What do you make of that when it comes to this bill?
Well, it could be data is the new oil, or if others are saying data is also water, it should be flowing everywhere, without any stoppages. I think the bill was required here for quite some time. The IT Act that came way back in 2000 and an amendment in 2008 had factored in a very lesser population where the importance and of data as well as so much of services that have come in the last few years were not able to specifically factor in. So, I think the bill is just right in time, and with India being one of the countries that deals with a lot of data of other countries also, as well as the growing domestic market where when we are looking at expanding digital India across the country, more people coming in, people also have their rights that go with their digital usage. So, I think it's just in time. It remains to be seen how the bill is implemented or when it's an act, because that's where the confidence of the people will grow, and I think the government has looked into all the aspects, even including aspects that should look at exemptions also.
Okay. Manish, Subimal's pointing out to India's large population, growing digital footprint. What is the bill doing when it comes to data belonging to you and me?
So, to understand what the bill is actually doing with the data, we have to understand why it's kind of important, because the data which we are creating now, it's immense. With our mobile phones, smart devices, we are creating too much of data, and we don't exactly know where that data is being stored, who is using that data, and what is the end goal of that analysis. And for that matter, this is very important. So, in the context of this bill, we can see that there are two important things. The most important thing is this bill is giving us the most important position to your consent, because the bill says no data can be processed without your consent. So, unless you consent that my data will be processed in this manner, it will not be used for that manner.
And what do you mean by processed?
Processed, let's look at it this way. If we take a few years, let's take an example of purchasing a sweater. If we go to a shop and you purchase a sweater, you are giving some money and you are generating an invoice. There are different kinds of data points here. The color of the sweater, brand of the sweater, price of the sweater from your point of view. From the shop's point of view, there is an inventory data. This data will be stored. This data might be used for marketing purpose to decide which brand has more demand in the market. So that data might be given to those people.
The shopkeeper could use that information to find out as to what stock of sweaters to keep or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all these things, storing the data, giving it to someone, analyzing that data, transmitting that data to someone, all these things come under the processing of data. Processing is a very wide term. It includes everything.
Okay. Karnika, so Manish referring to processing of data, but the bill also, puts across some special attention onto certain kinds of data.
Yes.
And I think it's called sensitive data.
Yes. The data has been classified into many different categories. One is a non-personal data, which is anonymized data. It will not identify a person or his personal information, but maybe just an IP address or a particular like I would say anonymized data, which will not really indicate who the person is, of whose data are you collection is happening in that particular place. Second data is the kind of which is personal data, but not so sensitive. That could be the name, address, or a particular location where a person resides, and certain things which are even otherwise may be available on the internet about the person. So it's not really sensitive, but it is personal data. And third category is the sensitive data, which is for example, a financial record of the person, a health record of a person. It could also be his biometrical information, something which is very, very sensitive, and you would not want that anybody else should have access to that without your consent. So that is how they have classified the kinds of data there. And for every processing, there has to be a consent, and there are different security parameters for each kind of data. For example, there will be less stricter, provisions for anonymized data, but there will be slightly more stringent, I would say, consent requirements for getting a personal information, and even harder for the, which is sensitive information. Critical information like financial data, even RBI has given certain guidelines in that regard and have to be only stored within India. Whereas for the others, there could be a service copy kept in India and a copy outside India. That is also permissible if the consent is there. So these are the kind of different provisions that the bill envisages, and every citizen has a right to control how the access will be given, whether there will be access given to them or not, and for what purposes, barring certain exemptions which are in the interest of the consumer.
Okay. Subimal, while, the concept of personal data protection being introduced, it's for the first time in our country, but in other countries, the concept of personal data privacy and laws and regulation to regulate that is already, been there for some time. How do you see the comparison?
I think a lot of comparison is done with the European GDPR, which also came just a couple of years back. I think if you look at whatever has been provisioned in the bill, and mind you, this bill now will go through the select committee, so there might be changes also. There are a lot of similarities that has been factored in. The concerns, that emanate from a privacy standard of a human being almost remain universal. Even if you look at American Senate Judicial Committee hearing on the 5th of November this year, the issue of sensitive personal data, everything was discussed very much almost on the same lines that the concerns have been here in this country. So we are at par, I would say, or the legislative approach here has been at par with what the advanced countries are thinking, because I would say that India's involvement in the global whatever norm setting and everything that is being now done at a much larger level also beyond the individual data or individual interests is also increasing, and so we get a flavor of what's expected out of it. And mind you, as I repeated earlier, we deal with a lot of data of many other countries through the corporates, through service level agreements, and we have been really good in our track record all these years. So I think we have factored in, just like Karnika mentioned a little while back, if you look at the sensitive personal data and then critical personal data. Now, if you look at the sensitive personal data, initially the thought was that they also, should be processed here. But when a lot of foreign elements and entities were even talking to us, expressing their concerns, in the bill which we have introduced, we have allowed the sensitive personal data also to be processed out. Although critical, subject to the individual's consent, but the critical personal data will not be processed out, it will remain only in the country. So, a lot of things, we have harmonized to, and,
Yeah, while this is an important topic, I need to get into a break, but this is a nice time to take into a break, because in the second half of the program, we can discuss the regulatory aspects and more about how the companies will deal with this. It's time for us to head into a break. When we come back, we will discuss the restrictions on transfer of personal data outside India and other additional responsibilities of data entities. Welcome back. On the program today, we are discussing the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. The bill seeks to regulate personal data related to individuals, its processing, collection and storage. In addition, it provides for an organizational technical framework for entities to process personal data and establishes a data protection authority for this purpose.
The bill restricts the transfer of sensitive personal data outside India. Sensitive personal data such as financial data, biometric data, caste, religious or political belief, or any other category of data specified by the government can be transferred outside India for processing only with the explicit consent of the individual. Such sensitive personal data should continue to be stored in India. Certain personal data notified as critical personal data by the government can only be processed in India.
Now, for success of this bill, few things will be required. The first is effective regulator of the authority as prescribed in the Act. Secondly, these companies must have Indian office as prescribed in IT intermediary rules, as well as a grievance mechanism system will also be required, so that individuals or the collective users can have the grievance redressal. But one thing more is required to be done, that is under the Consumer Protection Act, there is provision for the class action suit. So, in that type of data violation, that provision should also be incorporated in the new bill, so that collectively users can sue or the claim compensation against the corporates.
The bill places additional responsibilities on data fiduciaries or entities processing data. All data fiduciaries are required to implement security safeguards such as data encryption and preventing misuse of data, and they must set up a grievance redressal mechanism to address complaints of individuals. They must also institute mechanism for age verification and parental consent when processing sensitive personal data of children. Further, social media intermediaries with users above a certain limit and whose actions can impact electoral democracy, public order, must provide voluntary user verification mechanism for users in India.
See, the PDP bill has created various subcategories on the personal data, like sensitive personal data, critical personal data, and obviously the personal data. The sensitive personal data has been further subcategorized for the data belonging to children and to adults, because children as a category are much more vulnerable than adults. That is the legal position as well as the social position. So I think by categorizing the personal data or the data into various categories, the administration and the impact and the privacy enforcement has become easier, because it will not be important to enforce the entire bill on all kind of personal data. Until as it is really sensitive and until as it is really critical, the government control to the least is always desirable.
The bill imposes penalty for not following the provisions of the bill for processing or transferring personal data in violation of the bill. Data entities can be punished with a fine of 15 crore rupees or 4% of the annual turnover, whichever is higher. Re-identification and processing of de-identified personal data without consent is punishable with a prison term of 3 years or fine or both.
Manish, before we headed to a break, Subimal was talking about data processing. And one of the things that the bill deals with is the roles and responsibility of data fiduciaries, people who store the data and people who analyze data. So what does the bill say about data fiduciaries and what is the role that they play?
So the bill says the data fiduciary is a person who is responsible to devise the process of how do you process the data, what are the means used for that and everything. So data fiduciary, they have several responsibilities with respect to this data. First, there are responsibilities like they need to have a privacy document, privacy policy document, which will ensure that the business practices, organizational structure of the fiduciary is in line with the privacy norms of the bill. There should be transparency in processing the data, how you are collecting the data, what are the categories of that data, why are you collecting that data. It needs to be mentioned in the transparent manner. They need to employ enough safeguards and securities in the form of encryption or de-linking that data from the name so that it cannot be identified with the individual person. There's a And with respect to, if even after taking these safeguards, if there is a breach, then the bill also gives the provision that the data fiduciary will inform the authority about the data breach, and based on the authority's decision whether it will cause a significant harm or not, it will be communicated to the principal who owns that, who creates that data.
Creates the data. Karnika, so this is extremely important, right? I trust my data to somebody, and that somebody is then supposed to take adequate measures.
Yes.
If those adequate measure fails, what is the recourse that I have? Can I take my data to somebody else? Can the data fiduciary be fined? How does that play out in the bill?
When we talk about data protection, the current regime doesn't suffice, because when we say section 43 and 43A, ISO 27001 is a general certification, which is a recommended certification. With this new bill, there will be more checks and balances in the processing of data and the storage of data. There will be impact assessments to see the risks, if there any, to the personal data being processed, and the government will be giving out laying down various certifications or various guidelines by which will ensure that the data is accessed and processed in the right manner and stored in the right manner. So it will be more stringent and more reliable than just having an ISO 27001 certification. That is the first thing. Now, if there is a data breach, the Data Protection Authority looks into that breach, and the data fiduciary also have an obligation to inform the Data Protection Authority. And in case there is a breach, at the moment we have the under 43A and section 46 of the IT Act. Currently we have the adjudicating authority which grants compensation to any unauthorized access made by any corporate, for instance, and any kind of unauthorized disclosures made by them. So that is the current regime, and there would be compensation even granted to the citizens if there is a data breach happening, and there are stringent penalties. Like we said, 15 crores, up to 15 crores of rupees on fiduciaries, they have to bear.
And we'll come to that. Subimal, when we are talking about data fiduciaries, one of the things that the bill is doing is it is identifying certain data fiduciaries, who have more than a specified number of users, and whose the work that they do could perhaps impact electoral outcomes. How do you see those provisions of the bill?
I think the provisions on, first and foremost, the provisions on data fiduciary are very welcome, and I think far much more work has to happen on that in terms of fixing all the rules, responsibilities and all. Secondly, even within the data fiduciary, the number of people he might also employ in his capacity, who are responsible to him, but who also have to follow all those conditions and all. I think these are aspects that possibly the select committee will go through and even come up with far much more better options. That is what I feel. But currently, to start with, from legislative intent behind the bill, I think this is good enough, because if you see the whole effort to even have a data protection authority with 10 years of experience, 6 members and a chairperson, I think that itself will be able to take in a lot of the problems if it is created because of something wrong with the fiduciary. And then, of course, as she explained, the appellate authority, and finally it goes to a Supreme Court if someone is unhappy. So the responsibility is being put at very high levels to ensure that the fiduciary remains committed to the act and the intended purpose behind the legislation.
Okay. Manish, the Data Protection Authority, what are its roles and responsibilities?
Data Protection Authority has different roles. Its first role is a kind of regulator. It ensures that all the players who are involved in this ecosystem, they abide by the rules which are set up by this bill. They have to monitor implementation of this bill. In some cases, they are also taking a kind of proactive role, where they are saying there's a provision for sandboxing, and there's a provision for research, where they are promoting innovation in this field. They are also promoting innovation in the digital banking, that thing. And apart from that, they have administrative wing where there will be adjudicating officer who will look into the complaints which people which they'll be receiving from people about data breaches or something, and they will also be conducting that kind of.
So clearly a wide mandate not only to innovate but also to regulate, monitor what's happening. What else do you think the Data Protection Authority is doing, Karnika?
I think with regards to combating fake news, it's going to be a step in the right direction there as well, because when we say age verification mechanisms for children also, I feel that is a second plus point, because many times malvertising practices are there. There are online cyber crimes against kids. So when the social media intermediaries, as we call them, social intermediaries, they are going to have age verifications, especially for children under 16. It will be definitely giving more online safety to the children. That's something which we owe to them. And also the electoral, from that standpoint, curbing of fake news and rumors. And, we have seen a number of mob lynching attacks and other, issues which have percolated on the net in the last few years. So those issues can be tackled to a great extent, because that will be accountability of these social media intermediaries. They will be cooperating with the law enforcement agencies to give them the right data, so that such rumor mongering and all these activities can be curtailed.
Okay. Subimal, very quickly, the bill is making some exceptions for the government when it comes to usage of data and consent. What do you make of that?
I think this is absolutely right. Whatever exclusions we have under Article 19 of the Constitution, those are the exceptions that has been put, public order and so friendly relation, sovereignty of the state. So I think absolutely it's good in practice.
Okay. Manish, final comments on the bill. What do you think is the impact of this bill on people whose data, is going to be impacted?
This bill gives a comprehensive view. It is giving you it is protecting your right to privacy. It is setting up rules for how your data is going to be processed. And while doing all these things, it is also tackling the new problems of social media, fake news, as she has pointed out. So on and on, it will be a comprehensive thing.
Karnika, final comments in 10 seconds.
It will ensure the fundamental right of citizens is really enforced, because what is on paper, it is also practice, because that bill as we see now and the final color it will have will guarantee them the confidence that yes, our data will be protected.
Okay. Karnika, Subimal, Manish, thank you for joining us on this discussion. It is time now for us to end the show. You can watch our shows on the RSTV page of YouTube. We will be back with a new issue and a new episode. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.